Welcome to the recap of the 10th game of the World Chess Championship match between Ding Liren from China and Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia. After 9 games, Jan leads with a margin of 1 point. It's a best of 14 game match, and the winner of this match will be the next Fide World Chess Champion. Well, Ding is white in this game. He started with c4, which is named the English opening. Well, black played knight f6, knight c3, e5. Now we have a position which is the reversed Sicilian defense, but white is having an extra tempo compared to the Sicilian defense with black. Here white played knight f3, knight c6, and this is the first important moment of the game where white chose e4. Those following the match might have observed that in the fourth game of the same match, white had played e3 with white, and he had in fact managed to win the game with white pieces. But here he played e4. Well, one of the advantage of playing e4 is, of course, he gets more space compared to e3, but there is also a big disadvantage. That is, it leaves the d4 square without any pawn support. Black decided to develop his bishop from the most active diagonal, bishop c5. Now the reason why white plays e4, the justification of the previous move e4 is, after bishop c5, white can actually change the pawn structure by the temporary knight sacrifice knight e5. Here after knight e5 d4, white regains the piece, but now the pawn structure is different. Black played bishop b4. This is the best way to give back the piece. After white takes pawn takes knight, black captures the e4 pawn, attacking white's c3 knight. Here white has quite a few options, but the most common option nowadays is queen to f3. White not only defends the knight, but also attacks the e4 knight. Well, previously the move queen d4 was more common. However, after say knight c3, pawn c3, the bishop retreat, white has a fractured pawn structure, which he has in this opening. And he also has more space on the king side. So if white wants to utilize the space on the king side, he has to play a move like, say, queen g4, attacking the g7 pawn. But the queen on g4 is more exposed than queen on g3. Therefore, after queen d4, queen g4, white may have to move his queen again. And the maneuver queen f3, queen g3 is better than queen d4, queen g4, because white loses a tempo in this case. So having seen that, we can understand why queen f3 is played more frequently nowadays. And Ding chose this move. Black captured the knight. White took this. And here black has quite a few options, all of them playable. He can move his bishop to e7 towards the king side. He can play bishop c5, or he can play bishop a5, maintaining pressure on the c3 pawn. It's interesting to note that Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is black in this position, has a fair bit of experience with both sides in this position. He has played with white pieces previously. He has played the same position with black pieces previously. And the most important game which he has played in this line was with white piece, where he defeated Levon Aronian, another top player of the world, after Aronian chose to play bishop a5. And that game was played in my town in Kolkata in India. Well, here Jan chose the move bishop c5. Interestingly, Jan had faced this move previously, and we shall see where Jan deviated later with this after this move. White played queen g3, which is the most principled move. We have to understand this position first before proceeding. White's pawn structure is fractured, but in return for that, he has a very strong pawn on e4. And if he manages to place his pieces very actively, for example, say bishop to d3, this bishop to g5 or h6, the queen to g3, he can attack black's king side, these two squares, with his bishops, with his queen, and maybe with his rook lift. So this is white's general idea. And of course, black has a superior pawn structure. So we have a very interesting imbalance. Both sides will try to prove that what they have is more important what their opponent has. In this position, white played queen g3, immediately putting a question mark on g7 pawn. Obviously, black cannot castle. Castle is most desirable move, but he can't play this move because bishop h6 wins the exchange right away. He can play g6, which is a most, well, obvious move at this point. But black chose king f8. Now, this is slightly unconventional move, but it had been played by one of the international masters against Jan Nepomniachtchi himself. And Jan was white in this game. He was so impressed with black's idea that he decided to play that move himself with black pieces against Ding Liren in the final of the World Championship match. So this is very important point to note. Especially all the students should keep in mind that after playing games, whether you have played with white or black pieces, you have to analyze those games, and if you feel that any of the ideas played by your opponent is very good, you can follow, you can copy that idea and use those ideas in future games. Well, here it looks very unconventional because black can never castle. His rook on h8 is stuck. But then, as we shall see, black has very creative ideas of activating his pieces after king f8. White developed bishop e2, and black immediately challenged the e5 pawn. He wants to exchange and get rid of this pawn. If white does not have the pawn and black manages to develop his pieces, black will be left with a better position because of white's damaged pawn structure. White played bishop f4. He says, I'm willing to exchange the pawns, but only on my terms. Here I will attack these two pawns, c7 and g7, and win one of the pawns. So white played bishop f4, and black says, okay, thanks, I won't exchange. I'm preventing you from castling, because if white castles, black has a very nice tactical idea based on undefended bishop on e2. He can exchange and then he can play f6, capturing the e2 bishop when this one moves. So that is why queen e7 indirectly prevents castling. White played rook d1. He is provoking black, he's pressurizing the d6 pawn and provoking black from playing this to playing de5 so that he can reply bishop e5 and win one of the pawns. So it's a very nice, interesting contest where both the sides are basically improving the position and asking the other player to capture on to exchange the e and d pawns. Black played a very nice move in this position, and this was played by the international master against Ding Liren. Well, Cardoso had played h5. The idea behind h5 is firstly to harass and, well, to play h4 and basically drive the king queen away from a very important square. From here it is attacking g7 as well as this diagonal. So black is basically planning to play h4 He is also activating the rook, since the rook cannot be activated through this rank. So he is looking for opportunities to play rook h5, rook h6, or rook h5 in future after pushing this pawn. And of course, it also has a support square for this bishop to develop. So these are Black's ideas, and it has been played previously against Jan. For instance, if White captures the pawn here, White will be a pawn up, but then this endgame is good for Black, because although White is a pawn up, he has fractured pawn on the queen side. They can't move, and they are quite vulnerable on the queen side. That is why White chose not to take this pawn, and White chose not to play h4, which had been played by Jan himself when he faced this position. Because in that game, Black had exchanged the pawns and then played bishop g4. This was a very nice idea based on pin. The bishop got a very nice square to develop. And in fact, in that game, Black got advantage, but it was a blitz game. White managed to somehow swindle and win later. But Ding played castles, which is the most obvious move. White played h4 with the idea of moving the queen and capturing the e-pawn. Now White played queen d3. This is a very important move because it prevents Black from capturing on e5. If he takes e5, White will play queen d8 check, winning on the spot. Black played another very unconventional move, that is g5. It looks Black's king side is compromised. The pawns are moving forward, so they leave the f5 and f6 squares weak. But then this move has the virtue of questioning White what he would do with the bishop, whether he would retreat or he would capture on d6. Now here, of course, if he retreats right away, then Black will capture e5 and he would be simply a pawn off without compensation. So first White captured the pawn. When Black took this with pawn, now the bishop has a big question. Shall I capture on d6 or shall I move e3, preserving my queen to attack the king later? Well, Ding chose to walk into the endgame with an extra pawn, but against bishop e3, he judged that after exchange of the bishops, Black will have a very good square for his bishop. He would defend the f7 pawn and keep pressure on White's weak pawn. Of course, White can win this pawn anytime he wants. Even in the game, he captured this pawn and won the pawn right away. But then in the game, he did not have a weak pawn himself. So he took bishop d6. Yeah, after bishop d6, we have this endgame where White has an extra pawn, but Black has a very good pawn structure. White's pawn structure is scattered. Black played bishop e6. Well, one of the reasons why White chose to play this endgame is White has the option of playing f4, breaking Black's pawns on the king side, this chain. And after king e7, rook d4, Black is forced to take gf4, because if he plays g4, White will play f5, winning the pawn. So he has to play gf4. White captured f4, and this is the rationale behind White's play. Although he is a pawn up on the queen side, that's not so important. He basically creates a weak pawn on the king side so that he can win this pawn and get advantage. Black pushed the pawn. White played g4. He preserved Black's weak pawn so that he can attack and win it later. Now Black played the next few moves very quickly, and these are very important moves. Since black's queen side pawns are weak, especially the a2 pawn and c3 and c4 pawns, he found a way to attack this pawn by playing rook c8, king f2, rook c5, a4, and rook a5. He transferred his rook from a8 to a5. Now white played bishop d1, defending the a5 pawn. Black played b6, stabilizing these pawns. Here white played king to g3, keeping pressure on the h3 pawn. White played rook h6. Now after rook e4, we have a very important moment of the game and very instructive moment of the game. Here, as I have been emphasizing in my previous videos, one of the hallmarks of great chess players is that they not only plan their own moves, but they also anticipate their opponent's plans. Here, black saw that white is threatening to play rook d5 based on the pin. The bishop cannot capture the rook, it's pinned. And after rook d5, when the black rook would move, avoid exchange, white would basically, well, he will advance the c pawn and exchange his double pawns, and he would remain an extra pawn. So having seen this idea, black calmly played king f8. He moved his king away from potential, well, rook d5 ideas. White played rook d8 check, black played king g7, and now white played rook to a8, well, activating his rook. Now black decided to, well, give away his a pawn for one of white's double pawns, with the idea that after rook c5, rook a7, bishop c4, although white is a pawn up, but he has this c3 pawn which is very vulnerable to defend. White played rook a e7 and black played rook c6. He is piling up pressure against the c pawn. White played rook e5. He wants to exchange one of the rooks, which black did. And here black played another very interesting move, that is bishop to b3. This is a very good move because it not only attacks the bishop on d1, it's a temporary piece sacrifice based on discovered attack. The rook is attacking the c3 pawn, so he removes his bishop. Now, if of course white takes the bishop, black would capture c3 and win this bishop. We have equal pawns. This is how the game went. We have equal pawns. Rook endgame, it's almost a draw, but white still found a move to keep some pressure. He played rook b5. So this is another important point to note, that in these type of positions, white is likely to win h pawn. If white is a pawn up in king pawn endgame with multiple pawns, 3 against 2, after white captures this pawn, white will win the game. But if it's rook and pawn endgame, even one pawn down can be easily defended by the active rook. So that is why black preserves the rook. White captures on b6, black captures on a4, and now white took this pawn. White is a pawn up, but this is a theoretically drawn position where any good player could easily defend this position. One pawn down and the pawns are on the same side can be drawn with a rook. But black found a very nice move which enabled him to immediately liquidate the game and draw. That is, he once again sacrificed his pawn f5, which is a brilliant move. It simplifies and draws the game immediately. Well, It is in the interest of the defender to exchange as many pawns as possible. Here, white had to take this pawn. If he advances g5, black could easily play rook g4 and pick up this pawn. It will be a draw. So white took the second pawn, but after rook f4, he is unable to defend this pawn. He played rook b5, king f6, king g3. Now white is unable to support this pawn. King g3, and we have a king pawn endgame. Unfortunately for white, this is a rook's pawn, or the pawn on the edge. So this leaves the game with an absolute draw. Well, white actually, jokingly perhaps, played this move h5. Instead of offering a draw, he reached this position to show that both the players are fighting till bare kings. So this is how the game is drawn, and this game is perhaps little less dramatic than the previous games. Both the players played almost a perfect game, but it was a draw.